Welcome, festival goers. We're so happy to have you back today. And we're going to talk about such a unique topic that hardly anyone is talking about. And we have an expert here in the house. We're going to talk about starseed archetypes today with Saoirse Clare McGovern, who serves as an energetic mentor for starseeds who are in the awakening process, so that you can live the abundant life that you're destined for. And she actually channeled the Starketype system, Starseed archetypes. So we're going to dive really into that. We're going to learn about 12 of those different archetypes, and she's going to take us on a very deep dive. But after she received this download for the Starketype system, Saoirse served her clients as a personal trainer, a nutritionist, and a Reiki practitioner. She takes a whole being approach to wellness and healing. And she now teaches this powerful paradigm to starseeds who are ready to receive. And she has dedicated her coaching practice to the sacred work of helping others to embrace their unique cosmic blueprint. And she lives in Arizona in the United States with her husband, Philip, and their two adorable tabby cats, Pokey and Babu. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
So welcome. We're so happy to have you here on the festival.
Thank you, Bevin. I am so excited to be here. I think that this entire festival is brilliant celebration, and I'm happy to add to the conversation.
I would love to hear more about, how you received the Starketypes. I know that a lot of people on this call who are listening, understand divine downloads and receive those things. How did that happen for you, that all of this just dropped in?
Such a great question. I'll try and give you the most condensed version that I can, because I feel like I do always have to share a little bit of context around why at that point I was as open as I was and as tuned in to receiving really through my auditory channel. When I was 27, my father passed away from brain cancer, and I was an only child, very much a daddy's girl. And that was really the first time I had encountered grief and the idea that I could still communicate with someone who is in another realm. And even though the term starseed had been said to me in passing or kind of thrown around, and I felt this activation within and an identification with the term before, that's really when it intensified for me, was when I was going through my grief process and realizing that while he was here, he was definitely not a spiritually attuned person. And he was really the last person that I would expect to continue communicating with me after his passing. And so it was a really wonderful surprise. And then the following year, after he passed away, my husband was in a helicopter crash. And at his time of death, we had what I now know is a shared death experience, where he essentially took me and my light body to another place in order to say goodbye. At least that's my conceptualization of it now. It's a very, very vivid, clear, visceral memory and experience. And when he died, I was obviously still very much grieving my father. Now I had this extra layer, this extra complication of losing the love of my life, losing my twin flame, but also seeing what I saw and witnessing our essence and our existence through the lens of universal love. So I had this dichotomy within of learning how to release grief and say goodbye to someone from a density perspective, but at the same time be so joyful and happy that they've been essentially released from this human vessel and that they had served their life purpose. So that's really when my channel felt like it had been blown wide open. I became very, very sensitive from a sensory perspective. I went through a period of very chronic physical illness. I purged a lot of codes that I had been carrying in density my entire life up until that point. And I was 28 when that happened. And I think it was June of 2020, June, July of 2020. I'd been through this whole journey of grief and rediscovery and realigning and meeting someone else who is now my husband, who I know was brought to me through the divine intervention of both Christian and my father. And I was just in this really beautiful place of knowing that there's no reason for me to have gone through all of that if my being and conscious being wasn't meant for something more or wasn't destined for something more. And I was actually sitting here in this office. My husband lovingly calls it my pink dungeon because it's a very small room. It's a very cozy small room in our house that I decided I wanted to paint pink. I was sitting here in this room and really just feeling into the energy that's in the floor. There's a vortex that moves clockwise in the middle of this room. And I felt it open up and I felt it activate something that went straight through my root, all the way through my crown, and my ears started buzzing. And I speak to Christian, my late husband, very frequently. And as I mentioned before, I was also speaking to my father very frequently. So I knew that I had this direct connection to an ancestral realm or an ancestral team, essentially. And I recognized all of their voices. And I also recognized the voice of my seed of consciousness. But this voice that came in on that particular day, I had never heard before. And it said to me, you need to write down everything I am about to tell you. And I'm like, okay, I'm not really doing anything else today. I'd already been writing a couple of hours that morning on another book that I had been working on. But I thought, okay, I'm just going to be open. I'm just going to go with this. And I think I spent the better part of 3 days distilling this information down, like further and further and further. So I received the entire framework of what is now known as the Starketype system, the 12 Starseed archetypes. So in that download, I heard all 12 of their names. I saw all 12 of their sigils. I received their grouping by their family, which each family has 3 imprints. So there's 4 families of 3. And also what their ascendant position is, which is basically their responsibility to either make decisions, take action, or be a frequency holder on behalf of the other imprints in their star family. So there's 3 ascendant positions. And then the more that I wrote, there was just this very, very natural and clear delineation of what imprints holds what responsibility in density. And the main undertone of the entire download that I received over and over and over and over again is that this cosmic blueprint tells you what purpose your soul chose for this incarnation. And the reason why it's so important is because up until that point, starseeds believed that the only thing that is unique about identifying as a starseed is trying to discover your lineage or your planet of origin, or, if you have a fixed star that you came from. And really, that is a very energetically disempowering concept, because if you get so caught up in trying to figure out where you came from, knowing that doesn't necessarily tell you anything about what you're supposed to be doing now or what you're supposed to do with information. And B, you really miss out on the richness of what your energetic possibility is for living in this moment and living for the lifetime that you chose to experience. So I continued to write down everything that I could possibly receive. And I kind of stepped back, but still remained open for more around who's going to be receiving this and why, and what's the best means of teaching this, and what is my role as the ambassador of the system. And really what became more and more clear through that process is that most of us who identify as starseeds now in this current timeline have been through what I like to call the starseed struggle of feeling like you're very much an outsider. There's this language that you hold within that feels so natural when you're speaking it out loud, but it feels like nobody around you understands what you're saying. You might as well be speaking a completely foreign language. And the beauty of the Starketype system is, I know that you had kind of mentioned offhand before we started filming our conversation that you felt an identification with this Syrian energy, or like the possibility of being very tied to this Syrian energy. And I have very, very strong ties to Lyran energy, as well as the experience of being Atlantean. And what I realized is we're both holding the same codes, but we have no means of communicating them to one another, because if we're speaking the language of our origin, we don't have the same mother tongue. And so the Starketype system is essentially the mother tongue of what are we here to accomplish now together, working interdependently in tandem, even though we've come from different places. You and I could have the same Starketype. We could have the same mission that we chose to fulfill here on Earth in this lifetime, but have vastly different points of origin. Or we could be in the same star family and have very complementary gifts. We could be in completely different star families that are separated by 2 realms, but still very much complement one another because we understand what the other person is trying to accomplish. And so what this does is it not only brings starseeds together in a united purpose, instead of feeling fragmented by going down the lineage rabbit hole, but it also really shows us that, yes, we did come here for a specific physical reason as well, and that we have the choice and the power to relate to others in density in a way that is centered in empowerment, that we don't have to feel like, you're the black sheep of the family who has psychic gifts or whatever it is, because there is a reason why you have those gifts, and there's something concrete for you to do with them in this lifetime. So the whole process of downloading, I want to say that it was it should have been very overwhelming for me, but I would like to think that all of the events that I had been through in my life up until that point allowed me to be prepared and to be very open to receiving this information in a way that didn't feel heavy. It just completely made sense. And then everything clicked for me in terms of, this is your role as the ambassador. You need to give this activation to as many starseeds right now on this timeline who are open and willing and ready to receive the activation. So that was what, almost 2 years ago, which it's it's gone by in the blink of an eye. But we decided to launch a quiz. I want to say in October of 2020. So I took, because that was another thing that came through my channel, is like, well, people really love to take quizzes. And so this is a very, non-intimidating, natural vehicle to introduce starseeds to, this is actually your core imprint. And I spent a lot of time studying quiz logic. I put the quiz together. I tested it. I calibrated it with, different results. And we launched it in October of 2020. And at this point, we've had well over 100,000 starseeds around the world take the quiz and discover what their imprint is. And what I always like to say to people is, you don't necessarily have to go all in on learning the system, because for some, it's really just relative on where you are in your journey of knowing yourself and also optimizing your light body. For some, they will take the quiz and they'll see their sigil, which is, each of the 12 has essentially like a light code symbol that's attached to it. Some people will see their sigil, and that is enough for them to immediately know and understand, oh, wow, this is how I've been using my energy and my gifts before. And this is why I've felt so overwhelmed. And now I can go in this completely different direction and actually feel fulfilled. And then, of course, there are people that take the quiz and see their sigil and read, and they want to know everything. Like they want to know about the entire system. They want to know about what the other 11 imprints do. There's people that take the quiz. Oh my gosh, there was someone in our group that had taken the quiz 30 times. And I had to tell her, okay, step away, back away from the quiz, because there will be a very distinct core resonance when you know this is my star archetype. It's almost like a second homecoming for star seeds, because the first homecoming is hearing the word star seed and that feeling like an invitation. And then the second is receiving your core star archetype imprint and knowing this is the life that I am meant to lead because I chose it before I came here.
Wow, that's so amazing. And it sounds like when you received this download that it just was like, yeah, that feels really right to me, rather than what is this? I mean, It wasn't, this is why you came here specifically. And when you talked about the mother tongue, that was so interesting to me. The immediate metaphorical image that came to me was the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. How at one point, everyone, whether it was on Earth or in the universe, spoke the same language, understood each other, could just communicate easily, fluidly. And then at some point there was this like energy of separation, right? And everyone kind of went off and like did their own path, but that mother tongue is still present.
Yes.
And this is what you're talking about, where you have this overarching understanding, if you will, of why each imprint is here and what we're here to do. So I'd love for you to dive in, if you would, to individual archetypes and
sure.
Tell us some more about it. I'm sure everyone here is just as fascinated as I am.
Yeah. So I'll give kind of the 30,000 foot view, because what we try to educate starseeds on when they do decide to say yes and learn more and go a little bit deeper into how the whole system is organized is that every star archetype has 5 unique components, but each of them hold these components, and they all have their own specific kind of nuance and way that they augment your understanding of what each star archetype does. So of course they all have their sigil, which I mentioned before. It's a light code inscription that acts as an activation. So you can kind of think of your sigil as the ignition, like you get the key and you turn the ignition on, and that's what turns on this imprint that you have been holding. You've been holding it your entire life, but for whatever reason, now you're ready to actually move into the energetics of the imprint. The second component is the mission map. Every star archetype has its own mission map, which is a detailed diagram that shows the 8 universal macrocosmic vigors. All star seeds have the ability to express each macrocosmic vigor. It's just part of our cosmic DNA. Some people might think of this as, oh, well, I've identified with being clairvoyant my entire life, or I've identified with being clairsentient because I have such a deep connection to the animal kingdom and the environment around me. That is just one macrocosmic vigor, is clairs and channeling. The rest of them are alchemy, astral projection, frequency work, transmitting, organizing, manifesting, which we now know as actualization, clairs and channeling, and embodiment. So as a starseed, you might have felt very energetically overwhelmed for most of your life because you have the ability to express all 8 of these vigors. And one thing around identifying as a starseed that I think we're finally starting to move away from and get out of is seeing it as a point of taboo that other people might take your gifts as a form of entertainment or impose some sort of pressure on you to, demonstrate, I like to call it your street cred, right? As someone who is an empath or is a light worker or whatever. So if you're trying to constantly express through all 8 of those pathways, your body is going to be very, very overwhelmed. So each stararchetype has a specific mission map that shows you what your core macrocosmic vigor is and any underlying vigors that you are meant to focus on and express. And by doing so, that will help you accomplish your Earth mission. So, for example, my stararchetype is the Clarion, and my core macrocosmic vigor is actually transmitting. And what that means is that I need to keep my beacon as clear and turned on as often as possible so that when I am receiving messages, they effortlessly come out through the right pathway. There are other stararchetypes who have the core macrocosmic vigor focus of transmitting, who are only meant to just keep their beacon on. And that essentially bathes others in their energetic presence if they're in the same environment as them. So I'm speaking specifically to the Pharos imprint, which is 1 over from mine, same member of my star family. So you can kind of think as the mission map as a compass that lets you know where do you focus your energy and where have you maybe been off course. And that can really explain a lot of that energetic burnout. The third component, like I mentioned before, is your star family. So there's 4 star families. There's 3 imprints in each one. And you can kind of think of the other members of your star family as your sister imprints. They're more likely to think or behave or use their energy or communicate both in the earth realm and through their clairs in a similar manner to you. So the example I just gave of me being a Clarion, my star family is the elemental family. All of the imprints that are in the elemental family most easily connect with the ancestral realm. And we are the most likely to use our clairaudient channel more so than our other clairs. So the buzzing and tingling in the ears and the earfulness, all of that stuff, it's so interesting to me whenever I talk to another Clarion or a Pharos or a way shower. Universally, they'll say to me, like, I know that I'm being told that I need to move somewhere or I need to say something or I need to hold my frequency because my ears are just going nuts.
Mine are actually right now. So that's
yes.
interesting. I can't wait to get off. I've taken your quiz once, but now I'm like, okay, I promise I won't take it 30 times though.
Okay. Well, I'm like so curious to hear about what your imprint is because I feel like it might be similar to mine. But so for the 4 star families, like I mentioned before, they all share realms. They all share the clairs. Their energetic signatures are also going to feel very distinctive. So the first star family, the guardian family, they are of the earth realm. So their signature is kind of more low and slow. It doesn't mean low vibration. It just means a lot more like easy. It's consistent. They're the ones that are constantly like making forward progress on their own pace. And then as you move up through the realms, the second family, the elementals, are going to be, again, constant and steady, but maybe a little bit more highly calibrated energetically. Then you move up into the ethereal family. They're like, because they're constantly oscillating in and out of density with their consciousness focus. And then when you get into the diviner family, they're of the astral realm. And so when you're around a diviner, their frequency is often so high that it's imperceptible. And I do have to say that a lot of people who are empaths or have the ESP and the sensory processing and density that feels a little bit disjointed are of the diviner family. And that's just a very natural expression of their stararchetype. They're hanging out in the astral. It's so much more comfortable for them to be out of body versus in body vessel. But what's interesting is, of course, your realm and your star family, they hold karmic lessons for you to learn while you're here. So, diviners naturally are just going to have that very kind of like high buzzing vibration. And if they are grounded, in density, if they take any cues from their guardian friends, that is going to be a lot of work for them. But of course, it's very meaningful work all the same. The next component is the ascendant position. So like I mentioned, there's 4 families of 3. So we can kind of think of this as a grid. The families stack up, and then the ascendant positions move from left to right. So the ascendant position signifies whether your responsibility is to make decisions, take action, or act as a frequency holder. So the elder imprints are going to be a lot more contemplative. They receive a lot of information that they have to distill. And then they're essentially passing those codes over to the conduit imprint. My imprint is a conduit imprint. That means what I'm receiving is probably coming right through me into density. And then the vessel imprints are really here to be examples for other starseeds of how to embody frequency, of how to very deeply be present in their environment, in the present moment, and also displaying what the effect of that is on those who are around them. I think a term that we use a lot that, unfortunately has become a little bit distorted is raising your frequency or raising your vibration. Mm-hmm. And that's really what the vessel archetypes are doing, because they have such a potent impact on those who are around them. They're really those frequency holders who do activate others just by being themselves. So there's interesting differences and nuances of each expression relative to their star family and their ascendant position. And then finally, the illumination phase. So there's 12 starchetypes. Each of the starchetypes has domain over a specific numerical precept, the number 1 through 12. So their illumination phase will always start on the date-based portal that they have domain over. So for example, I keep using my starchetype, the Clarion, but when you read the grid in order of star family and ascendant position, I'm in the 6th position. I have domain over the number 6. So my illumination phase will always start on 6/6. So it's a 12-day period of releasing, up-leveling, remaining open to receiving new codes. And what's really fascinating to me this year around our collective experience of illumination phases, which we are in one at the time of us having this conversation, is that the first year that at least the members of my collective and my students, and we were all experiencing these phases together, it was almost very segmented, and people were essentially waiting for their phase in order to experience it. And now this year, there's been a very, very strong collective experience of each phase. And I think what's going on is, as we're becoming more familiar with each individual starchetype and their role and their mission map and where they really might need energetic support, we're able to recognize, okay, this is what the augurs might be experiencing now. So the rest of us really need to come in and support them through a particular frequency. So now we're all experiencing these illumination phases together. It might not be as intense or as profound as going through your individual illumination phase. But the beautiful thing that I've been witnessing throughout this with the members of my community and the starseeds who reach out to me and they tell me their experience is it's really connected them to the ebb and flow of being in the now. And, you're not in anticipation of like, oh, my illumination phase is in June, so I'm just going to discard this one that's happening right now. Exactly. Right. Yes. So it's really helping to construct a more united front of our understanding of our energy, and just kind of like the ebbs and flows and highs and lows and waves that we receive and release in. So that was a very long-winded answer to give you the basics of each starchetype. But what's fascinating to me is how interdependent all of them are, because they are unique in their expression. For example, because we are in the augur illumination phase right now, the augur is a master timeline reader, but from the perspective of mentoring others. And their karmic lesson is to release the false empath template that a lot of starseeds have been conditioned under, believing that you have to hold someone else's energy in your own light body in order to heal them, and moving into the natural augur way of being, which is holding the divine empath template. It's channeling and creating an external space to hold energetics within that allows your light body to remain sovereign and undisturbed. So, you look at this very, very unique function, and we're giving one starchetype permission to experience and live through this. And more likely than not, they have had to go through some sort of energetic initiation or issues with, operating under this false empath template. But by giving them this permission, the other starchetypes are also seeing the work that they are doing has a collective impact that is also strengthening the work that I am doing. Right. So for me as a clarion, for every augur that can really step into their imprint and say, you know what, I have sacred boundaries. I am sovereign, but also source connected, and I don't have to shoulder the emotional load of other people. The more often that they do that work and really accelerate their ability to heal and guide other people, the easier it is for me to do my job as a channel, delivering messages that now these people are a lot more open to hearing and receiving. Right. So the more that I, play with the dynamics of all 12, the more students that I have that are diverse archetypes. Like, one thing I'm very excited about is we're seeing more and more vessels activate, and they're going to be the last to activate in a massive way. But every time I have a mage or a sanguine come into one of my containers, I'm like, yes, it's happening. It's all coming together the way that it should. So the more that I play with that, the more appreciation I have for finding what I like to call freedom within structure, like freedom within a system that really just gives you the permission slip to express your gifts and talents freely without feeling like, you're doing it for, I don't know, because you owe it to someone else or because you feel like it's your responsibility. It's like, no, you're actually stepping into your purpose and also enjoying being here in density, because I think that's where a lot of starseeds tend to lose the plot is right. It's hard being in my body. I don't understand a lot of the way that, Earth works in density. I don't like density-based constructs. I'd rather hit the escape button. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no, you do have core preferences in density. And the more you allow yourself to step into those and play with them, the more fulfilled you're going to feel in your everyday reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love what you're talking about here. A couple of things that I think are so important is that, when you take the quiz, because I think probably everyone who's listening is going to want to do that out of curiosity at the least, and then maybe diving much deeper since you have this really rich construct and system that came through you, is that, we think, oh, I'm this archetype. I can't possibly express any of the others. I don't have any connection to the others. And I love that you're tying these in together as an interdependent system.
Yes.
And we might, potentially have some aspects that we're drawn to. Maybe we were a different archetype in another lifetime, another dimension. And so I think that's really important, because then if people are like, oh, I'm just constrained to this is what I have to do. That doesn't really feed and nurture the soul too much. Right. But Absolutely. When you start to see it, as you're saying, like, wow, this really gives me permission to step into my strengths and really leverage that. Like, I was given all of these gifts in this lifetime to do these things. And I can completely understand what you're saying, because for many years, I thought that this was a mistake for me to be on this planet. When I was 6, the first movie that I saw was E.T., the extraterrestrial, and they accidentally left him on Earth. And I said, oh, that explains everything. amazing. My people forgot about me and they didn't come back. And it took a long time for me to actually enjoy being in the 3D, being a physical being, being in my body, all the things, all the emotions, the full spectrum. We're here to live all of that.
Right.
And I'd love to have you talk a little bit about the difference between 3D and 5D, because there's a lot talked about that. And then what happened to 4D? Like, where is that? Because hardly anyone talks about 4D. So if you could elaborate on that, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. So I have the very interesting purview of knowing where I sit as a Clarion, knowing what my responsibility is, knowing that I am not a creatrix. The creatrix archetype is really the keeper of time codes. So they have a much better idea than I do of our collective cadence and pace on this timeline and how quickly we will move away from really being bound to density. But my perspective on this is 3D is a very easy term for us to use because it explains what's tangible to us. Like it explains our relationship to objects and to money and to other physical beings and to our environments. But really, I think of 3D as being more of an energetic and psychologically based construct because we've been so heavily conditioned to operate under a set of rules that rewards our existence through tangible means, like through the accumulation of things or access to specific places. And so right now, what I think is really amazing is we are witnessing the disassembly and the release of a lot of 3D constructs. I do believe that we are in kind of a middle space right now. We are in a 4D transitional period where, because of how connected we are to our knowledge of how our light body truly functions and the sacred union between the physical body and the light body as extension of self and being a bridge to liminal space and that being a bridge to source consciousness, we're kind of having to straddle two worlds. We have the quote unquote responsibilities of being human in density, but those are all illusions. They're all societal constructs, really. And we are seeing more and more and more people, I would say starseeds and earth souls alike, primal souls alike, who are becoming aware of these constructs and finding ways to cut ties or to release themselves gradually, piece by piece. So from the multidimensional perspective, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9D beyond, 5D is easy for us to conceptualize because that is where we currently live when we are completely released from these 3D expectations and constructs. I think that's where a lot of our light bodies are naturally resonating, but because there are still all of these tangible ties that we're undoing, again, we're in this middle path. We're in this straddling space. So I always like to think of, we talked about language earlier, and something that it is still a bit of a challenge for me because of how heavily I rely on my clairaudient channel is really figuring out how do you translate terms and concepts through all levels of density. So if I'm talking to someone who is a starseed, but they might not even know they're a starseed, and they are out of curiosity receiving the activation of their stararchetype, and there's something within that turns on and clicks, but they're very, very much married to density-based language. How do I communicate with them and tell them, these are your multidimensional gifts, these are your multidimensional preferences, and this is how you're most likely going to feel and operate in your day-to-day life? It seems that where we are right now, that 3D, 5D split is the easiest ground floor way to get those concepts across. But I do very, very much feel like we're kind of two minds and we're of two worlds right now, because we are releasing the things that we're ready to release, I think, through appreciation and almost deeper experience. Like, I think that the more embodied you can allow yourself to be, the more you will experience the resonance of how it feels to move freely without the density constructs being a limitation. But again, when we conceptualize, like, okay, what are my multidimensional gifts? There's the part of the brain and part of the ego and self-concept that says, like, well, that's great and everything, but what do I do with this? Right. So, for me, being a clarion, my multidimensional role is to be a cosmic messenger. And for me personally, because I have had so much experience with learning how that feels, I can very easily identify what that looks like in every day in 3D, right? But if you're someone who, let's say you're a creatrix, I had a really interesting conversation with a student of mine last week on a coaching call, and she is a creatrix, and she said, I'm really just not understanding this whole collapsing time thing, because that's a multidimensional function of hers. Since she is a supreme engineer of time codes, she does have control over our shared perception of how fast or slow we're moving along the shared timeline, and whether or not there are fractures or splits that we're working through. And if she wants to collapse any sort of construct that is married to time, which everything is in density, she can. And what I told her is that you have to think of that ability, that multidimensional ability that you resonate with, but you can't really explain it. You need to see that as a choice, because your job as a creatrix is to continue the expression of our free will and our choice, right? If we did not have choice, we would only experience time through a purely linear perspective. The idea that all things are happening in all ways at all times is not a density-based idea whatsoever, but that's the choice that you hold, and that is our expression of free will, is if anything can happen at any given moment in any layer of density, or that multiple things can happen at any moment, that is our soul's expression of freely traveling through the cosmos, right? Like, that's the highest expression of our free will. So for her, it's examining, where are those choice points for me? Is there a pattern that I have been seeing, perhaps in my life with a relationship or with something that I've been working through over and over again? And I've finally reached the point of recognition. This has been a pattern for me. I am ready to either let it go or experience it more deeply by immersing myself in this pattern. And that is the collapsing of time. Yeah. So once I kind of said that to her, she's like, oh, okay, I get that. Like, I feel like I know what my responsibility is a little bit more. And so those are all of, every single imprint has those multidimensional gifts and responsibilities. And that is part of the work of attunement, is figuring out, how do you distill that down and translate that into your awareness of your experience in density in everyday reality.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting you're talking about this, because I had the same realization yesterday. I don't know if it's this time period or just sort of in the collective consciousness, but that I had just finished repeating a cycle that I had done about 5 years ago. I mean, almost to the T, same kinds of people, same situations, same reactions, and just going back over that and going, okay, what were my choice points? Wow, yes, I wasn't happy to be doing this again. But, at some level, I chose this for a deeper understanding of what these things are. And then as we emerge from these experiences, these cyclical experiences, we realize I'm much stronger, more self-aware, more tuned into my gifts. And I don't necessarily see these cycles as punishment, but
Yes.
instead as my education, as my learning, as a star seed on this earthbound planet. I wanted to get to, and I know we'll need to wrap up here shortly. I could talk to you for hours. This is just amazing. But I wanted to get to this idea that you touched upon, is that there are earth souls and then there are star seeds. So not everyone here who's on this planet is from off-worldly origins. Can you talk more about that?
Yes. So I do believe that that is one of the main tenets of why we are here as starseeds. And if we do want to go through the lineage rabbit hole, you could make the argument that there are primal souls everywhere, right? From every point of origin. And so part of our karmic contract and our collective agreement is to be on Earth at a time when humanity is about to encounter a very, very critical, again, choice point of what direction are they going to move in. And so we have heard the call. Some have seen the progression of events and, basically said that we, as starseeds, as cosmic beings, have the ability to come in and maybe we are not going. See, I think this is the thing that starseeds have to understand. Maybe we are not going to intervene in the way that we think. Yes, our mission is collective ascension. It's moving into ascension consciousness. That may or may not involve a physical move out of density for primal earth souls. It may or may not involve actually accomplishing the mission that we have set out for, which I truly believe humanity is at a point where they will have to choose at some point in our lifetime on Earth whether or not they will remain authentically sentient. So, with the construction of artificial intelligence and AI codes, there will be an emerging humanoid that is more informed by artificial intelligence or non-organic constructs, which is very interesting because humans are the ones that are creating these constructs, right? More so than primal earth souls. And so this is why not only that we're here now, but that there is a new awakening happening of starseeds. Starseeds have been coming here for, who knows how long, right? And everything is cyclical. There's always these choice points that we've decided, okay, we're going to come here to witness this and hopefully assist in the way that we can from an energetic perspective, always with the objective of bringing consciousness to a point of viewing things through the lens of universal love. And so my belief that the decision to merge sentience with artificial means has been so manipulated and distorted that if that were the point of finality for humanity, that would not allow humanity to continue to be able to see from the perspective of universal love. And perhaps that concept or that my understanding of that will change the more familiar I become with artificial sentience. But for now, the messages that I'm receiving are that if you can't actually vibrationally experience the soul essence of love because you've been artificially constructed, then that's almost like a terminal point, right? So we're really here to help humans preserve their humanity. And what's interesting about that is our lesson is learning how to be human. Like we're in this classroom of, okay, these beings are like very much tied to these things and these bodies, and it's very easy for them to be in this vessel. And so how can I teach them and inspire them and influence them by fully saying yes and accepting to learning from what their body has to offer? So it's a very interesting kind of like symbiosis that we're in.
Yeah,
And
it's
I
like the
do,
difference between reading a book about history and actually being fully immersed in the experience yourself and going through all the pieces and parts, everything, the fully
yes,
dense parts, the really transcendent parts, and everything in between, and going, okay, now I actually understand.
yes, yes,
I
yeah.
understand at an embodied level that this is
Hmm.
what this is about. This is
Hmm.
why this is important.
Hmm.
And I love what you're talking about with AI, because I felt very uneasy about it myself, even though I do embrace technology, generally speaking. And what I hear you getting at is there's sort of no heart and soul. There's just all the mental construct, which the mental construct
Yes,
is very strong and it's great and it's a powerful energy, but there's just not that capacity for love
yes, yeah.
that we
And
know of, that we know.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I have, I could probably talk about this for 2 hours because I've taught a mini course on the reason why these codes are coming up right now. Um, but really the heart of it is, there's this distortion with 3D density primal earth souls that are really mistaking speed for progress and evolution. And with Moore's law actually proving true, it's almost like we're in a race against ourselves because we are the ones at the helm making this happen. We are the ones that are giving all of these artificial constructs more and more and more and more and more information to essentially educate themselves with so that Moore's law can continue. um, but really our role in this whole thing is to explain that technology is a tool that we should have agency over and not agency through. And that's what's happening right now is the most I don't really want to use the word vulnerable, but it's the only thing that is coming up. So you'll have to forgive me for this. But the primal souls that are very, very much mired in the frequencies of guilt and shame and anger, and they've been conditioned into like a very, very lower density vibration. They're the ones that will look at a piece of technology and say, this is my purpose and my place because it's so governed right now by 3D distortion codes. And so the more that people think that technology is how we gain our power, the more that distortion is going to happen. Because, of course, I'm like you, I'm all for tools that will help us stay more connected to one another. But we have to realize that there is a specific purpose and a place and a use, and that at the end of the day, we are the arbiters of what we're going to be doing with these tools. And also, it's never going to be a replacement for physical proximity and experiencing someone else's true energetic presence and essence. And I think that's kind of like this teetering point, this dangerous path as seeing it as a replacement. And that's really where this concept of like a humanoid construct is starting to come into focus from the collective perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Saoirse, this has just been an amazing conversation, and I really wanted to hone in on your quiz, because I think that there's a lot of people who really want to tap into all of this amazing wisdom as a clarion that you have brought through. What's the best way for them to connect with you? And of course, we'll have the link to take the Starketypes quiz, and then they receive a guide, I understand, which really takes them deeper into the system and helps them learn more about their mission, about their sigil, all the things that you've talked about today.
Yes. Well, there's really two pathways. I would say two pathways in. The first, of course, is to take the quiz. You can find that at starketypes.com/quiz, which I know you will have the link and the spelling for. But you can always take the quiz. When you complete it, there's a video that briefly explains the name of your starketype, your sigil, those 5 components that I outlined earlier in our conversation, and really just kind of gives you an introduction to the purpose that you have chosen. And from there, we do have free resources inside of our Mighty Networks group. You can also email us for a free guide that is specific to just your Starketype.
Well, Saoirse, this has been an amazing conversation. And I know you've referenced a couple of times about the Starketype quiz, where people can really tap in to their unique imprint, get some more information about that. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more and the best way to get connected deeper with your work.
Absolutely. Yes. So there are a couple of different ways to get started, but like you mentioned, the most popular and what I think is the most enlightening and fun way is to take the Starketype quiz, which you can find at starketypes.com/quiz. And I know that you'll also have that link spelled out and printed for everyone to access. But the quiz is free. It's 30 questions. And I always just tell people to answer with your gut instinct. Of course, if there's questions that you feel like, maybe spending a couple of minutes on and turning over a little bit, you're more than welcome to do that. But it is a fairly easy and fun process. And when you finish the quiz, you'll be shown your result, which one of the 12 Starketype imprints you most likely are. And there's a video that explains that Starketype's mission. It goes over the 5 basic concepts that we discussed earlier. So, what star family are you in? What's your ascendant position? When does your illumination phase begin? But that's really just the beginning. That's the activation that I talk about. Some people receive immediately and they know, okay, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And from there, after you get your result, you can always email us. We have a free report that we can send you that details just your Starketype's characteristics. And I've also written a book called Starseed Archetypes, The Ultimate Guide, and it's available as an ebook. We've sold around 6,000 copies so far. And that's more of the deep dive where you learn about all 12 imprints. I talk about the star families, the ascendant positions, and there's also a really handy tool in the back of the book that kind of serves as an inventory of your current alignment. How have you been using your energy? How in resonance do you feel with both your Starketype and the qualities of your star family? And it offers some suggestions on perhaps where you might be able to shift your focus. And from there, we do have a free community on Mighty Networks. It's called the Starseed Collective. So if you search for the Starseed Collective or the starseedcoach.mn.co, you'll find us. It's open to anyone. As I mentioned, it's free to join. We have a lot of very supportive resources in there. Every month, when the illumination phase begins for that particular Starketype, we publish a guide that kind of gives you an overview of how you might experience each of the 12 days individually, along with an overview of why it is important to witness the up-leveling of this particular Starketype. So you could always take the quiz first and then join our community later, or you can join the community and there's a very easy way to find the quiz link in there. But we just really want to make this information as available and accessible as possible for any starseed or really any awakening being who feels like they're being called to understand their greater purpose and also to understand how that purpose really serves everyone and not just their experience here on Earth.
Yeah, wonderful. And we will have all of those links so that you can get connected in. And I'm excited. I'm going to go in and join your community and learn more.
Yes, we'd love
this.
to have you. Absolutely.
I've just taken just a little dive into it. So now I'm ready to take the plunge. I'd love for you, as we wrap up our conversation today, if you can talk to, especially the people who are listening, who kind of have one foot in both of those worlds, one foot, kind of in the 3D paradigm, one foot really diving into the 5D and seeing what's there for them. What is the best way to navigate life in that way when you're kind of in both of those worlds? I'd love for you just to share just from your own experience.
Yeah. So I do think that it is a practice. There's an everyday commitment to the practice of living that I think once you see that and you agree to it, the practice does become easier. But up until that time, depending on kind of where you are, I guess, on the spectrum with what you said of having, one foot in this world and one foot in another, you might have found yourself, wanting to be very passive and thinking that spiritual evolution or the journey into knowing yourself more deeply is something that you simply receive and that doesn't require any aligned action. And then, of course, in the other camp with like the very density based folks, it's all about what's happening in the future. Where am I going? How am I progressing? And not really stopping to express gratitude along the way or really learning how to live in the present moment. So I think that's really the key, is finding the balance between those two things. How can you receive, but at the same time, take aligned action that deepens your presence and deepens your appreciation for being here now and also being the person that you are here now. I think a lot of people tend to get almost 10 or 20 steps ahead of themselves once they have this knowing of, oh, there's more information out there, there's more for me, there's this other side to myself that, maybe I didn't see before for whatever reason. And they want to go light years ahead when really all of that is accomplished by being very rooted in the now moment. So navigating that paradox, I think, is the biggest challenge. But once you say that you're open to stepping up to that challenge, that's really where the magic happens. And it does feel like everything that you could ever want or desire for yourself and for other people is instantly available in your reality. Like, we think that light year projection always has to be, separated by like layers and layers and miles. But when you really calibrate yourself to being open to the possibility of the present moment, that's where you'll actually find all of that juicy stuff.
That's such excellent advice, navigating the now and being here and being grateful and present and grounded and practicing being a human.
Yes.
And also holding a vision for the future. And,
Absolutely.
One thing that you touched upon earlier that really helped me is realizing that widespread change for 8 billion humans on this planet may not even happen in my lifetime. And so then that helps us to relax and take all the pressure. I don't have to save the world. I don't have to change everything. There's much work to be done over long periods of time, over lifetimes. And it's okay, whatever we're doing and whatever we're accomplishing. So thank you so much for your beautiful presence, for being that transmitter, for bringing this through. This is such important information. I'm so honored to have met you and have you be a featured speaker on the festival. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you for having me, Bevin. This was so delightful, and I just had such a great time being in your presence as well. It's always great to connect with a creatrix.
Thank you. And I'm going to learn more about what that is. And I hope everyone else who's listening gets a chance to learn more about themselves. That's what this whole festival is about, is self-awareness, owning our wisdom, and really coming together and having these little beautiful conversations.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank you for creating this space. I appreciate it.